Hi, my name is Ryan. I'm the creator of Arsenal. I want to do a quick walkthrough of the product. So Arsenal sits on your camera, plugs in through USB, and then lets you control your camera from your phone. So let's go ahead and connect to the app. One of the things that was important to me was that it connected as quickly as possible, so it does that. And then it gives you kind of this live preview of whatever you're looking at. So I'm just going to point it off this way in my room here. It starts out on this sharpness screen, which probably will get renamed, but here it's kind of like where the intelligence is. So on the sharpness screen, there's these set of constraints, and basically these kind of tell you what's a good range to make sure you get a good photo. So if we look at like this scene movement constraint, for example, if I move my hand in front of the camera, you're going to see it drop way down because it's basically saying something in the scene is moving, and you need to have at least this fast of a shutter in order to actually stop that movement. Now you can toggle these on and off so that if you don't want that, you can change that. But the vibrations come from a vibration sensor. I actually don't have that hooked up right now, but it will shortly. Right now, so you can see like right now, we've got like out this window. So we're at full dynamic range. So the dynamic range is 64 64 because this camera's base ISO is 64. So it's saying dynamic range actually decreases as you increase the ISO. So if I move, if I point the camera over here where there's less dynamic range, you can see that goes up. I could take a picture at 6400 and still capture all the details. Color range is the same thing. My room's pretty boring, so it's not seeing a ton of color range, so I could go up to 800. Depth of field comes from actually the focus screen, so I'll show you that in a little bit. And then a lot of kind of the things that we talk about on the site and on the Kickstarter page are actually grouped into this lens profiles. So there's different places we get this data that you basically shoot a lens and camera. You shoot these test charts, and then you can kind of figure out like how sharp a lens is at different apertures and where aberrations come into play and in what conditions. And so we basically use that information. So it's looking at, what's the sensor on here, what's the lens, what are the attributes of the lens to figure out, kind of where is it sharpest, where is it going to perform best. And, when you actually go to take a picture, there's a couple things that are going to happen. So when I push the shutter, it's going to try and, one, reconcile the constraints, but then it's also going to factor in, we've got this, it's called a convolutional neural network. It's basically the same algorithm you'll see in self-driving cars, for example. It's kind of the current algorithm to figure out what am I, to have a machine figure out what it's looking at. So we've trained it on all these great photos, and it can look at that and then say, okay, here's a lot of similar photos that were all taken with kind of this cluster of settings. And so it uses that to also reconcile. So I can kind of show you that, though it's not looking at anything interesting. But so those are kind of the hard constraints. There's a lot of soft constraints that kind of come and go. So I can show you some of those. So let me just put this in here, and then this is kind of flickering. Ignore that. That's going to go away. So related, if I go to Flickr, and for example I type in forest, and then and then I find a picture of a forest, and I point the camera at it, and then focus. Let's see, focus it on. Now this is a picture of a picture on my monitor, so this is not exactly ideal conditions. This actually works better in the field, but you can see down here it says, okay, now we're seeing these trees, so there's the tree constraint. If I point it away, the tree constraint disappears. If I point it back, it comes back. Sorry, it flickered the portrait one, but same thing I can do. Let me just do this. On Flickr I can say waves, for example. Showed a picture of some waves, and let me get that in focus here. Let's see. Let me actually do. Okay, there it goes. Sometimes it takes a second. So you can see it says, oh, okay, I'm seeing a picture of waves. Let me demo one more here. anyway, these are basically like the models that we've built specifically to handle kind of conflicting constraints. So waves is a good one, for example, where you want to ignore the subject movement, because the subject movement constraint is saying if you want to like stop all the motion, and with waves you actually don't. You want like a 1 to 2 second exposure to basically show some of the motion. So here, if we look at a portrait, for example, it's going to show us the portrait constraint where you want to kind of open up and blur the background, things like that. So, and then if I point away, it goes away. So that's basically the sharpness screen. Let me show you. I guess let me show you focus stacking here. Sorry. Let's go back to there for now. So the focus stacking stuff is kind of interesting. It's actually going to get, so we're actually going to end up sort of changing this UI, but for now you can go to here, for example, and if I click the shutter with the focus stacking on, it's actually going to go and start, it's going to use the autofocus motor to basically move the focus position based on a bunch of different factors. So it can kind of look at a scene and figure out how many exposures, or how many shots do I need at what focus distances to actually get everything sharp. Let me do this real quick, sorry. Okay, sorry, let me try that again here. Yeah, still working out a couple bugs. So what it's going to do is it's going to go ahead and move the focus ring to different positions using the autofocus motor. And then once it's done that, it's going to download all the images. So we'll give it a sec here, it's still taking photos. This is actually really useful in the field. I use it a lot for landscape photography. A lot of times you can't reconcile shooting at the sharpest apertures and getting everything you need in focus. So this is really useful because you can basically do that over multiple shots and end up with a way sharper photo than you could get otherwise. Normally this is a lot of work in post, but Arsenal makes this pretty easy because you can see here it's downloading all the photos for you, and then it's actually going to merge them on the device, and then it will write a 16-bit DNG file back to the camera. We're probably going to add support for 32-bit if people want that. But basically you end up with this kind of great merged raw file that you can work with. So it takes depending on how many photos you do. So this was 6, I think. It takes 30 seconds to a minute to actually do the merge, depending on kind of a lot of factors. It's actually not consistent just with how many photos you have. So so we'll give that a second. Here you go, you can see it loading, and then I think it'll open the shutter once it's done, or sorry, close the mirror once it's done. There you go. Okay, so we can go in and we can see here it's downloading the full res version. So here's the final output basically. You can see that the one in the back is in focus, the one in the foreground is in focus. And then if we actually go back here, we can look at kind of some of the individual shots. So you'll notice like here, I don't know where the actual focus plane was. Like here's the one where it was, this was kind of in focus, but then over here you didn't have this in focus. So anyway, really useful. And real quick, one of my favorite things is actually you can really quickly flip through all these photos, and then it'll kind of download, download the full version. Those are all out of focus. These are out of focus, but anyway, and then you can zoom in really quickly and kind of scroll around. So I could also share on Instagram or whatever from here if I wanted. So let me show you exposure bracketing too. Let's see. Let me do this actually. I'll point it out the window here so you can kind of get a sense of what that looks like. This is kind of flickering at the moment. You can ignore that. That's kind of another bug here. So let me focus this. There we It's kind of the same thing. We've got kind of a weird interface right now, but it's going to end up... okay, well, so it's going to take 3 pictures in this version. What we're going to actually have is where, depending on kind of what it needs, it'll take. So if there's a really high dynamic range scene, it might take more. Kind of the same as the focus stacking. It's based on kind of what you need. And the intelligence will kind of decide when to do that. So I don't have all that working, but all the data is there to... It won't be a problem to actually get that working. So again, it's downloading the photos. It's going to merge them here. And it does take a little bit of time here. You can see the high, kind of see the bright version here. Still processing. Let's see. This one's faster than the focus stacking, but it does still take a little while. Okay. So it's downloading. I'm going to add a progress bar for all this, and probably since you can be doing other things while this is going on in the background, there's probably going to be a some sort of kind of screen with all the cue for everything. So this is the merge version. The nice thing is you can see there's kind of some details in the black parts. There's details in the highlights. This is out of focus, but they're kind of captured. Whereas, on some of these, the dark, like we've lost all the shadows here, and then in the bright version, we've blown out the windows, and so anyway, so that's really useful. So that's the sharpness screen, basically. Let me show you the exposure screen, which is kind of the manual control one. Here you can change settings. This is more for manual people. There's zebra stripes, so you can see what's blowing out. Nothing too fancy, but gives you control remotely. So that's a nice thing to have. Let me show you the focus screen. Focus screen is kind of still a work in progress, but I can give you a basic idea. So let me do this actually. So let me go back to the exposure. We'll move our aperture, open our aperture up a little bit. There's peaking, so if I click this, I can see basically what's in focus, and then I can actually tap on something, and it'll move the focus motor. You heard it kind of beep, and then show me again what's in focus. There's also, the UI is not done for this, but there's multiple points, which basically lets you say, I want to make sure this is in focus and this is in focus, and then that information gets sent to the sharpness screen to basically figure out. There's another constraint that's like how deep does the aperture need to be in order to capture all this, and where should the focus plane be set, and then the whole scene basically does the same thing. Or basically does that for you, so you don't have to actually tap on, it just makes sure everything is sharp. I'll show the time lapse real quick. Let's see. I'll just do it this way, I guess. So the time lapse screen, the UI is getting redone, but basically, you can say here's my interval, here's the number of shots, and then it tells you what the runtime is and the play time based on that. And then down here, this is terrible UI at the moment, but actually let me just take a start one, and then I'll kind of show you. So okay, sorry. Okay. Okay, sorry, we'll connect back up here. These crashes are all related. It's the communication library we're using is super buggy, so that's going to get switched. Anyway, let me start a time lapse here. And you can see it's basically moving across, showing us within the interval how long is this, where are we? And then this red part that's not very wide is actually how much of that is spent on the exposure. So if we did bracketing, we'd see, there's more than one exposure. So you could do like bracketed time lapses and things like that. So I'm just going to real quick show you. So if we go ahead and do, this is a 4-frame time lapse, so not very interesting. Then at any point during the time lapse, we could actually hit the preview button, and it'll create a video for us that's whatever we've shot up until this point. So this is going to flash really quickly because there's not much to it, but yeah, you can see that. There's also all this Holy Grail stuff. This is a little hard to demo on a small time scale. It basically slowly adjusts the exposure so you get a smooth day to night transition. I'll do another videos outside at some point so you guys can see all that. But basically, yeah, that's pretty much the app in its current form. It is a little buggy right now, but nothing we can't knock out. All the core functionalities there. I've been using it a lot in the field and super happy with it. So anyway, thanks for your time.